Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, May 11th. Welcome to Science Class 4 today. And today we're going to be talking about the carbon cycle. So we're going to be taking notes. Make sure you're ready for that. And your only homework for today is to please submit a picture of the notes that you take during this video lecture. Now, the reason we're talking about the carbon cycle today is to really set the stage for learning about global warming and climate change later this week. To appreciate the full implications of global warming and climate change, you really have to have a solid understanding of this cycle. So I think it's definitely worth a day to take and make sure that we have everything clear on the carbon cycle. Now, carbon, as you know, if you think back to our chemistry unit that you guys all did a fantastic job on, is an element. It's number 6 here on our periodic table. And based on its placement here, I should be able to deduce that it has 1, 2, 3, 4 valence electrons. And having 4 valence electrons is part of what makes carbon so special. With those 4 valence electrons, carbon can bond to with up to 4 different types of atoms. The sheer number of possibilities, therefore, of carbon-based compounds is astronomical. Over 9 million different carbon-based compounds can be formed. And these are compounds that are important substances that you guys are familiar with. All of our fossil fuels, all of them, are carbon-based compounds. Things like methane, disregard water here, methanol, propane, etc., are all carbon-based compounds. And you'll notice they all have the same 2 or 3 elements, either just carbon and hydrogen, or in some cases carbon, hydrogen, and some oxygen thrown in. The same can be said for all sugars. Sugars are an important source of energy for all organisms. So things like glucose, fructose, and galactose all, again, are carbon-based compounds. They have the same 3 elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, as many of our fossil fuels do. If you'll notice down here, this is a sugar called deoxyribose, and that is the sugar that forms the backbone to our DNA molecule. That's why we call DNA deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so carbon's an element. It's present in anything that's alive or was once living. And living things use carbon, really the carbon-based compounds, for energy and for structure. One of the most important carbon-containing compounds that we're going to be talking about today is carbon dioxide gas. There's a nice little diagram. Think back to when we talked about chemical bonding. We drew molecules of CO2. We have our double covalent bond on both sides. Now, the carbon cycle, think back to the law of conservation of mass, okay? There are many different cycles in science, in a variety of fields. And because of the law of conservation of mass, matter can't be created nor destroyed. The number of carbon atoms on Earth is going to be constant. Really what we're just doing is we're cycling them through different locations and different compounds through different chemical reactions and processes. So the amount of carbon on Earth is not increasing when we're talking about global warming. We're just relocating it unnaturally to a different location, okay? But there are many cycles. The water cycle you guys I'm sure have heard of, the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle you may or may not have, but you will next year. And this is just a natural process, okay? So the carbon cycle traces the possible paths that carbon can take between the 4 different reservoirs we have, okay? Reservoir meaning 4 different storage sites that we have for our naturally occurring carbon. They are the atmosphere, the lithosphere, so meaning like the actual Earth, the rock, the hydrosphere, which is the ocean and all our water systems, and the biosphere, which is more the living organisms themselves. And again, those are our 4 carbon reservoirs. Sometimes we also call them sinks, carbon sinks. Let's start with our journey of carbon. Let's start with one of the most prevalent sources of carbon dioxide, just atmospheric carbon dioxide. So we have CO2 in our atmosphere, and that CO2 is utilized by plants during the process you guys know of photosynthesis. So plants actually draw CO2 out of the air, and they use it, plus water and sunlight, to make food. The chemical formula for that process is sunlight plus H2O plus CO2 yields or gives you sugar plus oxygen gas. Now, I have the formula for glucose here, but really this could be a different sugar, okay? It's just some carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in some ratio. Now, the CO2 from the air is now stored in sugar, which is then going to provide energy possibly for another organism. If you're wondering what this sugar looks like, here's some picture of some plant cells. You can actually see some of the sugars, okay? And think about, again, try to make these connections now that you're learning so much more about science over the course of the whole year together. Carbs, carbohydrates, that's why they're called that, okay? Carbohydrates are, again, carbon-containing compounds, simple, sometimes complex, like starch. Apparently that is the world's largest potato. I did not know that. Okay, so carbs, carbohydrate, carbon are all kind of one and the same, okay? So carbon compounds store energy. That's what I need you to remember. And again, the energy is bound up in the bonds holding the sugar together, okay? So carbon stores energy. Now, when plants are eaten by animals, or plant-eating animals are eaten by animals, the energy, okay, the sugar goes into them and they're able to utilize it directly, or they store it and another animal eats them and they utilize it. So animals eat plants or other animals to obtain this energy that's stored in the carbon bonds. When you eat, or any animal eats, you're able to access that energy that that food is storing via a process known as cellular respiration that you're going to be learning a lot about next year. But at kind of a quick glance, respiration is when you eat something like sugar, okay, and you breathe in oxygen. And these two things can combine and form CO2, which you exhale, water vapor, which you exhale, and then it also provides you with energy in the form of something called ATP that you'll learn about next year. But this is basically how we go from food and oxygen to the things that we exhale, plus the energy we need to survive, all in this process known as cellular respiration. So here's another visual for it. Again, sugar plus oxygen forms CO2 plus water vapor that you exhale, plus gives you energy. Now, if we're looking at the formulas, okay, the chemical equations here for cellular respiration, the chemical equation for photosynthesis, what do you notice? If you look closely, hopefully you picked up on the fact that they are basically opposite reactions. Okay, in photosynthesis, we take light energy plus water plus CO2 to get sugar and oxygen. Here, we're taking sugar and oxygen to get energy, water vapor, and CO2. So these two chemical reactions are in perfect harmony. And this is why plants and animals have such a nice relationship with one another, because what they put out, we need. What we put out, they need. Okay, so let's add cellular respiration into our diagram here. So once the animals eat the plants or eat the plant-eating animals, they then access that energy and exhale CO2, which then goes back into the atmosphere.